Well, welcome. My name is Jennifer Anderson, and I teach creative nonfiction and composition at LC State, and I'm also the faculty advisor for Talking River Review, our college's student-run literary journal. I always got to plug that every time. It's such a pleasure to see all of you here, as this is the first in-person Stegner lecture that we've been able to host in 2 years. Yay! Yes, so exciting. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we at Lewis Clark State College gather today on the indigenous homelands of the Nimipu, the Nez Perce tribe. We acknowledge the Nimipu as original caretakers since time immemorial and recognize their continuing connection to the land, to the water, and to their ancestors. We wish to take this opportunity to express our deepest appreciation and respect for the ongoing relationship built between Lewis Clark State College and the Nez Perce tribe. This is Lewis Clark State College's 40th annual Stegner Lecture. This lecture, established in 1982 with Wallace Stegner as the inaugural speaker, has long been a literary and cultural highlight for the college and the larger Lewiston-Clarkston community, featuring discussions about the writer's relationship with the physical and psychological territories in which they reside. Past speakers have included Edward Abbey, Norman MacLean, Linda Hogan, Terry Tempest Williams, Robert Wrigley, Mary Clermont Blue, Kim Barnes, and Natalie Diaz, among so many others. And tonight, we are honored to feature Joe Wilkins. I'd like to thank my colleagues in the Humanities Division for their generous help with and support of this event, specifically Louis Sylvester, Kimberly Tolson, Leilani Farrell, our division chair, Kyle Ferguson, and Dean Martin Gibbs. I'd also like to thank Emily Johnson here at the Center for Arts and History for lending us this beautiful space for tonight's event, as well as President Pemberton for her support. I'm now going to turn it over to Tiara Yant, an LC State secondary education English major, double minoring in Spanish and creative writing. She will introduce tonight's lecturer. Following the lecture, there will be some time for questions, so think of all those great questions you want to ask. And just as a reminder, please make sure to turn off your cell phones. And now here's Tiara.
Good evening. On behalf of Lewis Clark State College, I wanted to add my voice in welcoming our guest, Joe Wilkins, this evening to this Wallace Stegner lecture. Professor Wilkins, a Montana native, but a current Oregon resident, where he serves now at the faculty of the Eastern Oregon University's Low Residency MFA program, is both an award-winning novelist and poet. He has taught numerous workshops and festivals, including the Bread Loaf Environmental Writers Workshop, Fish Trap, and Kachemak Bay Writers Conference, and Orion in the Wilderness. He directs the creative program at Linfield University, where he also teaches English and environmental studies. Professor Wilkins has earned numerous awards for his various works, including the GLCA New Writers Award for nonfiction for his 2012 memoir, The Mountain and the Fathers. And he earned the 2020 High Plains Book Award for his most recent 2019 novel, Fall Back Down When I Die. He has, in addition to this, produced 4 collections of poetry: Thieve, Notes from the Journey Westward, Killing the Murnian Dogs, and When We Were Birds, which won the winner of the Oregon Book Award. From his bio, I was able to uncover that his poems, stories, and essays have appeared in numerous venues, including the Georgia Review, the Southern Review, the Missouri Review, Orion, Copper Nickel, Ecotone, The Sun, and High Country News, and his work has won the Pushcart Prize, earned multiple notable mentions in the Best American Essays, and has been widely anthologized. So we have someone here tonight who knows what he's doing. Mr. Wilkins is best known for his lyrical style and poetic Montana landscape descriptions that he masterfully displays with his various writing. He has an exceptional ability to describe place, specifically the Montana Big Dry Badlands of his youth. A review that I felt that I aligned with, this was one from his GLCA New Writers Award in Nonfiction, said, place begins as a raw, wide-open poetry. Wilkins addresses memory and the inability to remember in lyrical prose that is achingly beautiful yet never pretentious or sentimental. This past week, my classmates and I from the creative writing workshop here at LCSC were assigned an essay titled Broken Badlands, which we discussed as a class. And in this essay, we mutually agreed that Professor Wilkins exquisitely captured the Montana landscape and also the pain of loss, a child losing his father at a young age. He paints the spirit of his father through the land and the aimlessness that he experienced after that loss. The mutual consensus for us all was that his words were both fluid and poetic, full of mystery and depth, simple and refined, honest and raw. In other words, it was an effortless read that left a lasting impression upon each of us. Personally, I feel quite connected to Professor Wilkins' style as it is similar to one that I modeled after recently. Nearly a year ago, I was in Hell's Canyon, hiking several miles a day with the Hell's Canyon Institute students from Lewis Clark State College. And my capstone project there was to gather a small collection of poetry about the landscape of Hell's Canyon, the wilderness area there. And so it required me to pay a certain attention to detail that I wouldn't normally exhibit. My goal was to capture both the science and the spirit of the places we visited, and it was during this project that I came to discover the power of specificity. It requires a bit of research, but when I came upon the exact names of geographical locations, species of trees, insects and animals, geological formations, and natural patterns, I observed their transformative effect. Professor Wilkins is an exemplary and experienced writer of specificity. And it is in that specificity that his readers are transported to wherever he deems to take them. It's my honor to introduce you this evening to Professor Wilkins and to thank you for your brilliant contributions to the literary community. Your specificity in writing and open-heart lyrical style are evocative and memorable.
Thank you, Tiara, for that introduction. Thank you to Jennifer Anderson and the Humanities Division at large for bringing me here. Thank you to Leilani Farrell for coordinating so much of the work that goes into a visit like this. Thank you to all the amazing students I've had a chance to interact with here at LCSC over the past couple of days. It's been really lovely to talk with them, to answer questions, to pose questions, and I've just enjoyed it so much. And I mean, I enjoy working with smart young people all the time, but it's been especially wonderful in that this is as Tiara said, this is the first Stegner lecture in 2 years that you've had in person. This is the first in-person writing event I've done in over 2 years, and so I feel both really nervous and really excited. And so thank you for being here as witnesses to this. I'm really humbled and delighted to be giving this year's Wallace Stegner lecture. And I'm going to admit right up front that I'm cheating a little bit. I'm going to give kind of a thing that's sort of like a little bit of lecture and a little bit of reading. And so I hope that works. I think it might fit this capacious place, the American West, that is not one or the other, that is a little bit both and at times. And so, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get going. I'm going to move things around so I don't knock anything off as I get excited here. But can everyone hear? Okay, good, okay, great, all right. So, here we are. It begins with language. I'm maybe 10 or 11. I'm fixing fence with my grandfather, installing a new corner post. He has already backed up the dark blue Ford tractor and sent the post hole digger spinning into the earth, that dry snick and deep rumble. And now he slowly hauls the digger up, goosing the hydraulics at regular intervals, spitting out ever wider shawls of dirt, the whole dark and perfect, a volcano of hard, dry Montana earth wringing the mouth of it. My grandfather parks the tractor, and I shovel clear a path through the ring of dirt, and together we horse an immense creosote-covered railroad tie into the hole. He chews it up as he wants it and holds it, while I shovel and tamp, circling, the wood of the shovel warm, the iron of the tamping bar cold. I do a last round, shovel and tamp, and my grandfather lets go, steps back to admire our work. It's nearly noon, and this is the moment I've been waiting for. The tide of my blood lifts. I rise onto my very toes. Good enough, my grandfather says. Come on, partner, let's go get some grub. It's what he always says. And the familiar words ring in my ears and down through me. It's not just the praise, good enough, about as good as it gets, coming from my grandfather. It's not just the anticipation of hamburger steak, buttered potatoes, and salted garden radishes for lunch. It's the way he says it. Partner with a D. And go get grub, all those G's. And though I don't have words for it, I truly feel each of those 12 syllables, 9 of which are stressed, boom and hollow, boom in the hollows of my scrawny chest. Excuse me. It's a little colder out there than I anticipated here in Lewiston, Idaho. Language, writes Nobel laureate Czesław Miłosz, is the only homeland. Of the work of another Nobel Prize-winning poet, the critic Tom Slay observes, for Seamus Heaney, the relation between words and images has a sacral, incarnational element. The first priority of language is to embody the world. All those years ago, working with my grandfather, reckoning with my father's untimely death, coming of age in a place of great human and ecological violence, in a culture shaped by the colonizing forces of extractive agriculture, and industry, and ever-deepening rural poverty, I didn't know that's what I was doing. Didn't know I was searching for a language to fit myself to the world, to fit the very world back into itself, to make of the high, dry plains of Montana something sacral, incarnational, to make it and truly my homeland. But I heard it. In my grandfather's voice, in the 6-note songs of meadowlarks in the wind and dry grass, later in the music of Lucinda Williams and Uncle Tupelo, and in my super senior year of college. I've talked a lot with students the last couple of years about my super senior year. It was a really important year, right? You get around the track 4 times, go ahead and go another. My victory lap year, during which I had room in my crammed computer engineering major schedule to dabble, I took a poetry writing class. And there found the art where, as Donald Ravel puts it, the language gets made. Ever since that class, in the fall semester of 2001, just up the road from here in Spokane, Washington, I've been writing poems. And I'd like to share with you a handful of poems which I hope illustrate the ways I intend to embody the world in language, the ways I've tried to create a space that is true and sacred and troubled, where you are not taken away from the world, but thrust more fully into the embodied fact of it. So, a couple of poems. This is from my book, When We Were Birds. This is called Each Stone and Go On. Isn't it a shame, my grandmother said, silver fork in her shivering fist, how we have to go on eating. We were sitting up to burnt chuck, potatoes in their dirty jackets, and hunks of Irish brown bread, the two of us sitting up at the old wood table. The one years ago my grandfather built of planks pulled from an abandoned mine. My grandmother stared at her plate. She couldn't have been more than 100 pounds then, the palsy at work in her hands, her hung face. I was 15 and hungry. I had shoveled for her that day 2 tons of furnace coal. It was nearly winter. The summer passed. My grandfather had gone ahead and died. Even if it was only soda bread and fried steaks, I see now it was something. I shoveled another forkful of buttered potato into my mouth, bits of the stone we call salt between my teeth. And a couple of poems from my newest book, Thief. There's a number of poems in this book that are all subtitled a poem against the crumbling of the Republic. And they all take their genesis from an email I got from an old high school friend. One of those emails you don't expect, and it was very clear from the email that he was struggling, and he had emailed me because we'd been very close in high school and really hadn't talked in the 20 years since. And so I tried to write back, as one does after 20 years, not really sure, awkwardly, perhaps. And he wrote another note, even more revealing. And so I tried to be as upfront as he had been, and then he never wrote back after that. And I felt somehow stymied. I felt I had so much more to say. I wanted to talk to him. And so I immediately started writing all these poems back to him. And of course, this was also in the aftermath of the 2016 election, which laid bare many divisions in our society. But I think maybe more than most, the vast gap in understanding between rural folks and urban folks, and how we might all have to do some work into finding a way to speak to one another across that gap. So I'm going to read two of those poems. If I Could, or Poem Against the Crumbling of the Republic. Old friend, I'm afraid you are lost. The streetlights sputtering, the night about hard and dark. I know you're tired. I know in the turning of your life this is not where you thought you'd be. Jesus Christ, be careful. The door you see might well be a mouth, its rusty voice the lie's hinge. I'd bring a flashlight and a sack of beef jerky sticks if I could. Maybe I can. Maybe if I reach out, my fingers might shape the bones of your face. Oh, let me find the other one here. Just Anybody, or Poem Against the Crumbling of the Republic. Old friend, stuck in that same small town, we tried every way we could to kill ourselves. That night down on the river, that night I lost you, that was a stupid night. I think about it all the time. We'd already sunk the front wheels of your 3-on-the-tree Impala in the cow shit and mud. Around the fire, I didn't know half the faces. You gnashed a palmful of pills. You took off your shirt. I didn't want to ride with just anybody. Old friend, where did you go? I circled the flames, banged on every back window. Later, swaying at the water's edge, I started tossing rocks, winging them hard. I was hoping in the dark I'd hit you. One more poem. This is a poem of response in response to the great Nikki Finney and her wonderful poem in her book. I'm going to forget the name of it. Top of my head. I'm so sorry. But Nikki Finney's poem, Instructions for Brown Girls. And I read the poem and was so moved by it, and so moved by the delicate and amazing way she both spoke to identity and spoke around identity. And so I had to try to write a poem in response. And so this is called Instructions for Poor White Country Boys Wishing to be Poets. Be siphon, be shovel, be ditch magician, water here, water there. Be in the dirty water a spool of snakes essing off every which way. Or the greasy crease in your grandfather's slouch hat, the fly swatter snap in your mother's hot hand. Be 10 hours of back break, tamp and crank, zerk gun, cutter bar, come along, get down in the dirt and dig. Know you're getting, you'll never know quite where. Listen to Waylon and get weepy. what all else Emmy Lou will learn you. Carry in your pocket like your sausage finger daddy did a pen. Dog your every page if you have to. Then reckon all your bad ancestors. Memorize the thank God stories otherwise. Thirsty? Lucky you. You got the look of fence wire and trees to drink. But for all the boiled coffee and cigarettes, be careful when you kiss. So much of my poetry, as you've no doubt noted, is rooted in memory, in my own experience. My grad school mentor, the kind, wise Robert Wrigley, who taught many years here at LCSC, noted the same. I'd gone back to grad school after teaching math in the public schools of the Mississippi Delta. Went back because whenever I wasn't lesson planning and calling students' parents and chaperoning junior high dances, I was either reading books of poetry or furiously scribbling my own poems. Despite my passion, that first year of graduate school was hard. I'd been behind entering undergrad, my small rural high school, not exactly the equivalent of the private schools in Portland and Seattle, which many of my peers at Gonzaga had attended. And now, engineering degree and secondary teaching certificate in hand, I was behind again. I'd long been a reader, but up until grad school, no one had ever systematically told me what to read. No one had ever helped me make sense of it. I didn't know the theory or the terms, the language my fellow grad students bandied about so easily. I didn't even know, for instance, that there was an entire genre of study called creative nonfiction. I really didn't. I had no idea that was a real thing. But that's what Bob said I should do with all the stories pressing at the seams of my poems. He said I should take a creative nonfiction class. And it was in that class, Finding the Father in Contemporary Creative Nonfiction, taught by the incomparable Kim Barnes, that I found another way I might attempt to embody the world. Like poetry, creative nonfiction brings language to bear on the world, yet it does so while maintaining fidelity to memory, experience, and truth, and with the tools of time and interiority more fully at hand. Where poetry privileges the body, the sounds working the way up our own throats, creative nonfiction allows the fuller seeing, feeling, thinking self onto the page. Joan Didion puts it this way: I write entirely to find out what I'm thinking, what I'm looking at, what I see and what it means, what I want and what I fear. James Baldwin this: all art is a kind of confession. All artists, if they are to survive, are forced at last to tell the whole story, to vomit the anguish up. And so, following Baldwin's advice, I turned to the wider canvas of creative nonfiction, to personal essay and memoir, and in this space was able finally to reckon with a place that had made me scars and all. And I'm going to read another short section here from my memoir, Mountain and the Fathers. Quick drink of water first here. But this book very much has its genesis in Kim's class, Finding the Father in Creative Nonfiction. It's absolutely where much of the bones of it were built. So this is a short section titled Burn Barrel. Sometimes, after dinner, my mother would ask me to take out the trash and burn it. During the day, I didn't mind this chore, hoped, in fact, that it would be given to me and not my brother. For if you didn't dump the trash, you had to dump the chicken pail, an old ice cream bucket of moldy slices of cheese and melon rinds and coffee grounds and whatever other kitchen scraps a chicken might peck at. The trouble with the chicken pail was you had to face the bandy-legged rooster, always strutting and working his long neck back and forth and clacking and snapping his beak, and maybe even the squawking geese or the black-faced buck sheep chewing their cuds and bumping heads with a loud crack. Most of the time, dumping the garbage was the less fearful chore. Except at night. If my father was not working late in the garage or the sheep shed, which he didn't much once he was sick, there was no light on the plain save the moon and the small holes of stars. On a cloudy night then, or during a new moon, the sky went liquid black, flooding everything, the known road and corrals and trees off along the river, in a lake bottom of blackness. Except for the dim porch light, nothing sounded that dark for miles. It flowed over and around you, surrounding your each and every step, lapping at your thin arms and small hands and paper sack of garbage, fist of wooden matches. and each step only deepened the blackness, made you aware of new pools and riffles of night. I was a fearful boy, my heart like some small, impassioned animal slamming at the bone cage of my chest. I'd toss the garbage sack in the burn barrel and pull the matches across the iron 2 at a time, blue spark and fast orange flame, and toss them in one after the other, and breathe as the darkness rolled back, slipped like water off the body of the rising fire. This was how I managed it, with fire. I seldom entered my fear, but found ways to beat it back. When my cancer-racked father yelled at me, yelled and swore at me because I was a boy and had done something wrong or was in his way somehow, yelled at me because there was in him a turning pain that bit down to his bones, I ran to the shelter belt. I ran and squatted in the tall grass and clenched in my fists the weeds and grass, and to anchor me there, safe and away, I stayed hidden in the tall grass, away from him. To this day, I remember so little of my father. I can see the wall of his back as I burrowed into my parents' bed as a small boy. I remember him raising his rifle and taking a step toward a yearling sheep readying for butchering. I remember his tamed magpie, Maggie, dropping out of the sky and onto his shoulder, the way he loved and teased the bird, his shirt pocket full of the cat food Maggie craved. I remember as well flashes of a day in Billings. Maybe he was hauling a pickup load of cold ewes to the auction yards. Maybe he had to get a part for the swather at Tractor Supply. But no matter the reason, he brought me with him. It was just the two of us. I sat on the pickup's bench seat and, like him, studied the road, hooked my arm out the open window. He bought me a hamburger at a cafe in the Heights, and somewhere a helium balloon. On the way home, in a grocery store parking lot, I think, I accidentally let the balloon go. And my father, in his creased jeans and going to town shirt with its red checks and shiny snaps, he came to me and comforted me. Told me my balloon float and float and float down to some other little boy who would become my friend. I remember even the gray blue sky, the balloon slipping up and into it. I know he took us fishing. And I remember Pop Peters and the great slopes of scree high on the mountains and the crashing river water and 6-packs of beer and strawberry pop cooling in the mossy creek. But I don't remember my father. I've been told my brother and I often followed our father around as he worked in the garage or in the shed, and I remember the warm stink of sheep and straw and shit, trays of greasy tools, and the quick knocking of the air compressor, but I don't remember him. I know he often had friends over to drink beer and laugh with, that each fall his college buddies came out to our place to hunt antelope, and I do remember them, their beards and silver cans and cigarettes, but I do not remember him. I remember only a few fading moments of my father, and then I remember him angry, then I remember him dead. That is what I remember. I think maybe this is how I managed my fear, and then my grief, which is just another kind of fear, by tossing a match on every memory of my father that might burn. Though I continue to fit language to the world as a poet, and see and feel and think my way through the world as a nonfiction writer, I found myself in the last few years turning increasingly toward fiction. Fiction, for one, is what I first fell in love with as a reader. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Does anyone know A Tree Grows in Brooklyn? Oh my God, it's my favorite book ever. Cannery Row, My Antonia, Love Medicine. I remember precisely the way these novels blew me right open as a boy and a young man. Here were worlds like and unlike my own. Here were characters like and unlike me. Here was confusion and loss and love and persistence. Here is James Baldwin again. You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. It was books that taught me that the things that tormented me most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive, who had ever been alive. While Baldwin is speaking of books and literature writ large, I think by allowing us entry into the minds and lives of characters that exist in some ways between reader and author, by asking us to speak with and listen to these characters, to spend intimate time with them in their own strange, troubled, joyous lives. I think all this allows fiction its particular power. Fiction makes us less lonely. And I grew up in a lonely place. When I write fiction, I get to gallop and storm about with a motley crew of friends and adversaries. I get to throw wide the door of the imagination and let whatever light stream in, whatever wind. Where poetry for me is about the essential relationship between language and the world, and creative nonfiction is about language, world, and self. Fiction for me is the way language and imagination enlarge the world, so that we might sit down with one another across place, time, and circumstance, where I might journey back to the Montana I knew and ask, what if I never left? What if I came back now? What if across time and distance the luck of the draw hadn't have somehow favored me so mightily? Well, I'd still be me, though differently, and you'd still be you. But maybe there's a way we might yet speak. Jessamine Ward, one of my favorite contemporary writers, put it like this in her National Book Award acceptance speech. You looked at me, at the people I love and write about. You looked at my poor, my black, my southern children, women and men, and you saw yourself. You saw your grief, your love, your losses, your regrets, your joy, your hope. Fiction does nothing less than remind us we are somehow one another. And again, I'd like to share with you some of the things I've been at work on. And I'm gonna bring out a clock so I don't go too long here. I'm going to do something I almost never do, and that is read a little bit of work in progress, if that's okay. So I'm going to work on the next novel, and my wife Liz is here, and we just kind of workshopped it on the road trip here. So I'm not going to read the end because there's a lot of work to be done there yet. I'm going to read from the beginning, which I feel a little bit better about. And so I'm just going to read a couple sections here. And this is in short chapters, and this first one is called Into the Noise. After the pickup sped past, the boy crawled up out of the weeds and started down again the slope of the mountain road, paperboard guitar case in hand, green canvas backpack jouncing about his ears and shoulders, the cold afternoon light hazed with road dust. He was moving fast, breathing hard. He could taste it, the dust. At the one-lane river bridge, he looked both ways up and down the road, no one coming, not as far as he could see. He hugged the battered guitar to his chest and took off at a near run, the knock of the instrument inside making a kind of music. The rusted struts of the old bridge rose above him and slid over him, and the thick, cross-hatching shadows darkened the boy's vision in time as he breathed, as he ran. Halfway across, a fishing boat bobbed around the upriver bend, fly lines curling through the air and lighting on the deep green water. The man at the oars spotted the boy, lifted his chin. Fuck. Here he was, a kid, 16, but so skinny and small. People often mistook him for younger, with an army surplus backpack and a guitar running across a nowhere bridge on a nowhere road on a Sunday afternoon. Fuck. He slowed, waved back. Tried to pretend everything was okay, was as it should be. He'd gotten good at pretending. Then, across the bridge and out of sight, the boy ran once more until his heart sounded hard in his ears. A little less than a mile on, the gravel road opened onto a blacktop highway, the tight, green, dark corridor of forest opening as well, and he slowed, stopped dead. He was a few miles east of Nye. He couldn't catch a ride here. Not yet. Someone from town might recognize him. He'd ridden the school bus with his little cousins and the few other Nye kids all the way to Absaroka. Picked up the mail at the post office any number of times with his aunt, his Uncle Heck hauling him to the trading post on beer runs. That was before Heck stopped letting him go to school, go anywhere, before it got bad. Crouched in the yellow grass and pine saplings at the edge of the woods, the boy dug his hands into dead needles, into gritty, fungal-smelling soil. Don't think about it. Not the camper. Not the swung weight of the splitting maul. The boy crouched and rocked and leaped up and started to run, but stopped. He had to be smart about this. These were the hours that mattered most. The highway would be faster, but he didn't want to risk being spotted. If he tried to run in the woods, he'd trip over a rock or root and break his ankle and freeze to death. He split the difference and paralleled the road just inside the woods, moved slowly, carefully, watching his every step. The runoff creeks coursed with meltwater. Barbed wire fences sliced along property lines, the slope of the land itself steep and uneven, and wherever there had been logging in the past decades, his uncle, a salvage logger, had at least taught him the woods. The pines were dog-hair tight, the forest dark and dusty, sharp dead stobs below the canopy. The boy thrashed through as best he could, tore his flannel, scratched his arms where he'd rolled his sleeves up. He was worried his guitar case wouldn't hold, worried he'd fuck up his shoes, ratty chucks with slick soles. He didn't know how far he'd come, but he made for the road. The hand of the sun at his back, the boy came up the berm and kicked through the beer cans and deer bones and the verge. The first couple of times he heard a vehicle, he threw himself back into the bar ditch. After a time, he realized he wouldn't be able to tell who was a local and who wasn't, not until he'd seen the fly rods or the gun rack in the back window, not until they were long gone. The sun dipped down below the blue shoulders of the Beartooths, and the boy shivered in the mountain shadows. He didn't have much time. He needed to put some distance between him and his uncle's place. He hoped maybe the fishermen were calling it a day and heading back to their lodges or fancy hotels or wherever they stayed. At his back now, he heard the far grind of an engine and stepped just off the highway, turned and stuck out his thumb. Mountains were backlit, darkly eclipsed, and the vehicle emerged out of that vast blackness and rolled by and slowed and stopped some yards beyond the boy, the wind of its passing pulling at the tails of his flannel, flipping his long dishwater hair across his face. He finger-combed his hair and spied through the dusty back window of the Bronco a bristle of fly rods, the whole of him unclenched. A breath of held air drained from his lungs. "Where to?" One of the fishermen, gray waders rolled down around his waist, silver can of beer in hand, was already out and leaning the passenger seat forward so the boy could climb in. "The interstate, if you're going that far." The boy lifted his guitar in first, then hauled himself up into the back seat. He had to clear away plastic boxes of bright, feathery flies and fast food wrappers and beer cans and crumpled sweatshirts and a couple of grungy ball caps to make room. "It's a mess back there." The driver wore dark glasses, even for the fading light, and he too lifted a can of beer to his lips, sipped. The boy flinched. The driver, with his short red-brown hair and neatly trimmed goatee, didn't look a thing like his uncle, but the dark glasses, the way he draped his hand over the wheel, wedged the can of beer in his crotch, it was all too familiar. "No worries," the driver said, his voice deep, clear, steady. "We take turns when we go fishing. Driver only gets one beer on the river, one beer on the road." The other man, tall and lanky, patchy blonde stubble stippling his jaw, folded himself into the cab and slammed the door, grinned at the boy over the back of the bench seat. "But the passenger," he said, laughing, "gets to get shit-canned if he feels like it." The driver checked his mirrors and eased the Bronco back onto the highway. The passenger, still laughing at his own joke, cracked another Coors Light, drank off the foam. "I'm Zach," he said. "That ugly bastard behind the wheel's Cal." "Kurt," the boy said, though his name was Justin. "All right, Kurt. The interstate it is, or hell, if you want, we can take you all the way to Billings." Billings was where Heck had picked him up last fall. The boy remembered the dirty marble floors and the high, intricately patterned ceilings of the old Greyhound station, and when they stepped out onto the street, right in front of them, a dancing man with 3 pink plastic clamshell hair clips in his beard. "Fucking bums," his uncle had said, "degenerates. Whole city has gone to shit." The boy wasn't sure how far the way Billings was, how far east. He thought to hitchhike straight west once he hit the interstate. But his uncle was right. Billings had almost been like a real city. He could maybe busk his way into a little money, maybe enough for a bus ticket. It'd be safer traveling on the bus, and he could sleep. Now that he was sitting, pine shadows striating the highway, the evening beginning to pool and deepen in the bar ditches, in the valleys below and beyond, the boy felt astonishingly tired. He began to count the hours he'd been up since before dawn in the forest, but stopped short of noon. He didn't want to tally those next moments, to remember what had happened between then and now. "Billings would be great, thanks." "No sweat. Zach took a long drink and smacked his lips, then went on, "Good day on the river. Rainbows are running." Cal landed what was likely a 6-pounder. At this, he punched the driver lightly on the shoulder. Lucky bastard. The boy's mind flashed to salmon, to the creek back of the trailer park in Bremerton, and the astonishing colors of the spent fish, their dark, mottled bodies drifting in the shallows. So though he didn't really know, that's what he imagined when the man said rainbow, said 6-pounder. "Yeah, man," Zach sighed. "Good action all around. Always a good day on the river." Zach drank and drank again and dropped the empty to the floorboards where it tinged and rolled. Then hooked his elbow over the bench seat and turned and looked at the boy, really took him in. Green canvas backpack, beat-up guitar case, long blonde hair, silver studs in his ears, sharp face, small, almost girlish ears and nose, knob of chin. Zach studied the boy a moment longer and, as if deciding, turned to the tape deck. "You got a guitar there. You like music, Kurt? How about Springsteen the Boss, right?" Before the boy could answer, the speakers crackled and came alive, and they drove on for a time, no one saying anything but the boss, who was long gone, who was on fire, who was going down, down, down. The mountains faded into the slow-falling evening, and the boy leaned into the dusty plastic mesh of the speaker, into the noise, and slept. Okay, one more really short, is that okay? One more really short chapter? Okay. There's 3 main characters here, and we'll read just 2 of them. This is one long emptiness. Here at the hill's crest, the world was 2 parts grass, 3 parts sky, and at this very moment, a pure measure of unraveling light. The nose of the pickup, a Ford full-ton old blue, tilted down the steep face of the 79 hill. The engine caught and revved on the grade, and the man felt himself stilling into himself, the sadness, anger, and heart scatter of the last weeks lifting and whirling away in a gust of prairie wind. As the hill flattened, he hit the gas and splashed through the south fork of Willow Creek, puddles here and there filigreed with ice and maybe 16 inches of clear, moving water in the depths of the curving channel. Old Blue bounced up onto the long straightaway, and the man, Rene Bouchard, 71 years of age this April, in the year of our Lord, 1994, shifted into third, dust barreling up behind him. The fences were in bad shape. Posts leaning like loose teeth, barbed wire bellied, broken here and there. Even for this early, unseasonable spring, the winter past had been hard, and too, despite the string of men he'd hired, most of them smelling of rum and potted meat, 6 days of whiskers spiking their sloped chins, he hadn't given the place the work it needed in these past years. He hated it, but he hadn't. Rene lifted his foot off the gas and coasted as he came on the near pastures, the corrals, the shed. Out front of the camp house, a low-slung, tin-roofed cabin, he slowed and stopped and killed the engine. Not ready to get out just yet, thinking he'd let the moment stretch and feel, he leaned back in the bench seat and studied the scene before him. The iron boot scraper squatted at the lip of the plank porch, and 2 street-backed wooden chairs flanked the camp house door. On the north side of the camp house sat the rain barrels, the drinking water cistern, and the pump, all up on railroad ties. From behind the long white snout of the propane tank poked out. Directly south of the house, a wooden fence enclosed the garden she'd always insisted on, the bed thick now with dry matted grasses and the yellow-green stars of weeds. The footpath, bordered here and there with river rocks, led as ever off the porch and around the garden and into the cottonwoods, willows, and chokecherries, which sheltered the outhouse, then down to a gravel bar and stone by stone across the north fork of Willow Creek and up onto the high cut bank where, facing west, he'd built long ago a split-log bench, her sunset bench. Well, he was home, and for the last time. He cranked up Old Blue's windows, turned in the quarter glass windows as well, and pulled the latch and shouldered open the pickup door, the hinges creaking. He worked his arm down one sleeve of his quilted flannel jacket, then the other. The day had been almost warm, but the cool edge of the evening was in the breeze. He studied the dust of the road, the untrammeled grass about the camp house and corrals, no sign of the sheep or of Bassett, the sheepherder of many years. He thought to haul in a few of the supplies he'd brought, sacks of groceries, his 243. But Rene Bouchard had his one chore, and ranch work, as he always told his children, comes first. The shed door opened into stillness, into shit and straw-scented darkness, and he moved by feel, by bone memory. He dippered oats into a metal pail, and beneath the broken peaked roof walked the belly of the shed, the high, south-facing windows letting in just enough dirty light to lean blacker shadows away from the support posts and pens and lambing jugs. Soon the shed would fill for lambing, the bleats of ewes in labor, drift of hay dust, scent of blood and iodine. But for now it was one long emptiness. At the far end of the shed he slid the bolt open and pushed the gate to the side on its rollers and blinked with the sudden sunset colors that met him. Renee called out to the dry hills, called and clicked his tongue and shook the metal pail, oats rattling, dancing. And over the grassy gusts of wind came the pounding of hooves. 9 Spot crested the hill first, the blue-black of her tossed mane and slim shoulders, then Big Red, looking as ever like a horse somehow made out of bricks, save the long white lick down the center of his nose. Renee called again, shook the pail, and felt even before he could feel them the good, rippling hides of horses. Thank you. That's all I've got. Is there questions? Yeah, time for questions. I'd be happy to try to take some questions. Yeah.
So, excuse me if I missed it, but do you have a title yet for the novel?
Oh, yeah. I should have said that. Working title is All Apologies. We'll see if my editor agrees with that title or not. Yeah.
In your novel, Fall Back Down.
Yeah.
At the very beginning, the credit to Wallace Stegner.
Yes, yeah.
You want to explain why you put that in there?
Yeah. So this is my first novel, and the epigraph for the entire novel is from Stegner, from Wolf Willow. If I'm native to anything, I'm native to this. And I was thinking of a lot of things with that idea of I'm native to anything, I'm native to this. I was thinking about being native to loss. I was thinking about being native to a whole way of life sort of losing its way. I was thinking about being native to being orphaned, as many of the characters in Fall Back Down When I Die are. Orphaned of fathers, orphaned of mothers. My mother's thankfully still alive, but my father was gone a long time ago. And I was thinking about being native to a place of both such intense beauty, such astonishing natural beauty, and such astonishing human struggle. And it's not a new struggle. It's a struggle that was visited upon the native folks of this place long ago. But now it's also visiting those who supplanted them. And so I was thinking about that when I was thinking about that idea of being native to this place, and how that those struggles seem to me, even as I've moved away, part and parcel of how I understand the world and part and parcel of how I try to make sense of the world. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
So in that book, there are several mentions of piles of bones. And then in your first reading, you talk deer bones.
Yeah.
Is there some reason that you're focusing with bones?
Oh, sure.
I thought at the end
Yeah.
it was the bones of the father.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You know, so when I was a kid, one of our favorite toys were bones. We had a whole collection of bones in the log cabin, which the log cabin was a kind of skeleton itself. It was an old homesteader's cabin in the back acre of our shelter belt. I don't even know whose it was. No one quite knows whose it was. It was originally the Shellhammer's place, but this cabin predated them, so we don't even know. But there was a collection of bones there, and again, we don't know who started it, but we, of course, contributed to it. And there was just bones spilling everywhere. They were some of our favorite things to play with, and I say that now, and then I think about my own children. I think about that's a weird thing. To be a child, to be someone growing up, to be someone sort of like coming into age and bones are what you identify with, what you play with. I'm not sure that it's necessarily a bad thing, but I do think there was a sense that already, even early, even before my father was gone, a sense of I knew the place I was a place of bones, was a place that things were dying. And of course, again, this is all historical. My grandfather tells a story of pulling up a buffalo skull out of his ranch, and his acres were some of the very last, we don't know exactly, but the upper Muscle River was where the last herd of free roaming buffalo in the United States were slaughtered. And so it very well could have been on his acres. He pulled a buffalo skull up and he picked it up, and it literally went to dust in his hands. It just fell apart in his hands. Yes, absolutely, yeah. And that's, I talk about getting hit over the head with a big metaphor hammer. That's the place I was raised, a place where there was a violence we didn't even want to acknowledge that preceded us, a place of bones that we wanted to think was a place of beginnings. And that's still, I think, the case in much of the American West. Yeah. Other questions? That sent us a little dark and dour there. They don't have to be quite so. Yeah.
You mentioned that your writing is very therapeutic and healing for you. What would you say was your most healing piece that you wrote?
Oh, that's a great question. I've been talking with classes here at LCSC, and a number of the questions have been about, have you showed everything you've written to your family? Which I think is, an important question to ask when you're 19 and 20 and figuring yourself out and not sure how your parents or your grandparents might take the thing you just wrote. And it's a question that I remember well. And I remember early on writing stories about my grandfather and trying to write. And of course, I'm writing my experience of him, right? Like, he died when I was 22, so I was a young man. But he was so important to me. Just this giant in my life, right? A god, just a mythic figure in my life, but also very human in so many ways. And trying to write him on the page, and I remember writing an essay, and it was for I think you were in that class, Jennifer. Yeah. And I remember writing it for Kim Barnes's class and being both really pleased that I wrote it, but then terrified because I thought, oh my God, my grandmother might read this. Because my grandfather was gone at the time. My grandmother had been variously not very supportive of me quitting my high school teaching job and going back to grad school. And then when I found out that essay was going to be published, I thought, well, gosh, I got to send it to her first just to make sure. And I sent it to her, and she called one night, and she was crying, and she said, Joe, I love it. Joe, that was your grandfather. And it just, oh. So I think the question again, the original question.
What was the most healing?
Yeah, and so I think that was one of them, right? And it was healing in the fact that it made me think like, oh, it's okay to write these things, and it's okay to write them in all their complexity and fullness. And even my grandmother, someone who is really intense and had a vision of the world, would recognize that it is true. So that's maybe the first one. Yeah. Yeah.
So you talk about your background in engineering and a degree in that, and then creative writing. Does that background ever inform your current writing?
No. I say that a little bit because, as I was telling students, I wish I'd been braver, right? Like, I came from a really small rural place, and I picked the engineering major because we'd been poor growing up, and I thought, I want to do something that's going to make some money. And I very quickly well, not very, maybe my sophomore year, realized like, I hate every single engineering class I've been in. It's been miserable. And what I loved was my history class. And I loved my philosophy class. And I loved my literature class. And those things fed me as a human being and just delighted me. And I wasn't brave enough. I wasn't brave enough to switch. And so I've been encouraging the couple of student classes I've talked to be brave, right? Like, listen to yourself. You know things. Be aware of what your heart and everything else inside you is telling you. And so I wish I would have listened to myself. I wish I would have listened to those signals, because I think I might have saved myself quite a bit of heartache. That said, the one thing I often do think about is the rigor that you have to take. So as computer engineering, we did a lot of coding, and coding is a rigorous form of language. And if you don't do it right, the program doesn't compile, and it sends you this little error, and it's frustrating, and you're in the lab, and your friends are all getting things to compile, and you're not, and you're really frustrated. And I try to bring that same level of rigor to the language I bring to a poem or a story or an essay, that every comma matters, every syllable matters, the language is important. Ravel, again, talks about, he says that the Holocaust happens when someone lies to themselves. And they lie to themselves in the form of language. And so we need to be really careful with our language. We sit very still with every syllable we pronounce. And so that sense of rigorousness with the language, I think the training in coding was important for, though I still wish I would have switched over to poetry sooner. Any other questions? No? Well, I'm happy to talk more after as we finish and gather. And thank you again for being here. Thank you so much to LCSC for having me, especially to Jennifer, and to everyone in Humanities Division for sponsoring this. This has been a real honor. Thank you so much.